How's it going, apes? We're going to get right into it today. We're going to look at waste generation, especially from humans. Obviously, we're going to see real quick that we are the only ones that contribute waste on this planet. And we're going to look at how the U.S. is what's inside our waste stream and what we do with it. And then finally, we're going to look at those 3 R's I'm sure you've known since you were little ones: reduce, reuse, recycle. And finally, we're going to look at how organic material can be composted and put to use rather than ending up in a landfill. So here we go. First off, we are the only living organisms that generate waste. And going way back to looking at maybe this food web here of a forest, we have going back to, the red hawk will eat the rabbit, and you don't need to be told how to read these arrows. But the whole point of this is at the end of the day, we have these decomposers, or the detritus, the insect and the worms. Think about it. Last time if you walked through the woods, have you ever seen a pile of leaves from the fall before still there? No, because every fall or as spring and summer go on, that those decomposers and that detritus, they break things down and put it back into the food web. Unfortunately, for us humans, we use some things, or we have materials that have been manufactured that cannot be used by living things. So we have to look at waste as this system. And when we mean system, is like just like that forest ecosystem. You have the plant materials, the nutrients, the water, the energy. These are all inputs. And unfortunately, there's some inputs we are putting in, like the hazardous waste, the metal, the paper, the glass, that cannot be broken down and put back into our system. So that's what we're going to look at here. So the material outputs are the ones not useful and not consumed. And it's important to note that energy is wasted as well. But those outputs, so it's, again, we don't have the detritus. We don't have these things breaking down. Whatever it is, we have these raw materials, like let's say for your water bottle, we use it and eventually we can't use it anymore and it goes to a landfill. And those outputs are what are not useful. And so what we've started to develop is this throwaway society. And actually, this is one of the things the United States kind of was one of the first leaders. I guess you would call the U.S. the leaders in throwaway society. And it hasn't always been like that. If you look back, or if you look at that cartoon, or even in this graph here, back in the 1900s in the U.S., virtually everything that was made out of metal, wood, or glass, and it was recycled. Although they didn't call it recycling back then, you'd have people called junk dealers or scrap metal yards. And, you'd have this, let's say, wooden bookcase that breaks. You can take the wooden bookcase, someone will create it into a stool. The stool breaks, you can burn it for fuel or heat. That's not happening anymore, because after World War I, you can see kind of in the mid-1900s there, the demographic of the United States changed, and so did the consumption patterns. So what started to happen is industrialization was increasing, the wealth of the United States increased, and so even cultural changes were happening, which made it possible for people to purchase these household items that could be used and then thrown away. I mean, if you really think about it, think of all the things that you might use once, like maybe a TV dinner, or you have napkins or disposable plates or plastic forks. So these started to become common in homes. And again, we use them once and we throw them away. So this graph is a great example of showing how this has been happening the last, since the 1900s. And again, the reason why we have wealth equals waste, because we usually see this in mostly wealthy societies. Until society becomes relatively wealthy, it doesn't generate a lot of waste. So we're going to look at that. And also what happened is what's called planned obsolescence. And this is an actual thing that was brought up in the late 50s, where you design a product, so people will use it, they'll get joy out of it, but then a few days, a few months, a few years later, they're going to need another one. Think about it. You own a business, you just don't want to sell the best product, and no one ever wants it again because your product is so awesome that they don't need another one. You want to stay in business, you want to make money. So that's what our society has come to, this planned obsolescence, where we have this great item today, but we know in the future we're going to need one again. Perfect example is what cell phone. I mean, maybe every year these are coming out now, and essentially, I get it, it's super awesome to have the latest iPhone or whatever it is, the latest car, whatever it is you want or need or like, but it's important to know that, that iPhone 3 you had back in 6th grade, is probably sitting somewhere, in a landfill or in another country, which we'll see here in a little bit. So what is this municipal solid waste? So what it is just refuse that's collected by municipalities. It's coming from households, it's coming from industry or businesses, and it's coming from institutions. And it's important to note that 60% of the MSW comes from homes, and 40% is coming from these commercial and institutional facilities. So all those homes are creating the most waste. That's what it's important to point out. And looking at this figure, it's showing this trend towards greater generation of MSW overall on a per capita basis from 1960 to 2011. And you can see in the first 47 years of this period, the total amount of MSW generated in the US increased from about 88 million tons, US tons, to 250 million US tons. And so again, it's this combination of increased population, but also going back to that throwaway society. More and more things are becoming a one-time use thing, and then they're discarded. So that's going to lead us to the solid waste stream. And with this, what we mean here is that we have seen that the MSW is made up of things we use and then throw away. But the goods that we use are generally a combination of organic items, fibers, metals, plastics, all these different things, and a certain amount of waste is generated during the manufacturing process as well. So that's where we get this waste stream. We have to take your product, let's say your phone, and yet we are going to go backwards and look at how your phone was created, the materials used, the fossil fuels burned, and things of that nature. So if we look at how much is out there, you can see that kind of the West Coast, Nevada, California, that's something you don't want to lead, is the amount of garbage you have. And as I mentioned before, these are all coming from, not only the iPhone that's in your hand right now, but how and where was it manufactured? How did it get to your home in regards to packaging, and then even transportation? Did it come from China? Did it come from locally in Nevada, or wherever it is you are? So you have to keep those things in mind as well. And the other thing you need to look at is how long can something be used? So you have two examples here, and you have this mug that could last me years, assuming there's some student that doesn't take offense and on purpose knock it off my desk. Or you have your Starbucks coffee mug that your single one-time use, where you might not even make it to class with that thing because you're walking past the administrative building, a dean sees it, that thing's in the garbage before you've had your first sip. So other things we need to look at is what they're made out of and what they are, and even the goods that they are. So keep that in mind as we go through this chapter as well. So what is this stuff made of? And if you look, most of it is paper. The waste that we are generating, the category paper, and this includes newsprint, office paper, cardboard, boxboard, the things like your cereal box or your food box, that makes up almost 30% of what's going on. And then, again, this is important to point out, this is before recycling. Okay, but paper is one of the main contributors to the landfills. And it's also important to point out that, and we'll talk about composting at the end, that 34% of our current MSW could be composted. So paper could be composted and used again, which we'll see here in a few slides. Now, looking at this figure, it's kind of busy, but what I want to point out is up at the top here, we have the original waste stream. This is before recycling. So it's composition by weight of the MSW in the US in 2001 before recycling. And that's paper, food, yard waste make up more than half of the MSW by weight. And that's a great deal, especially when you can find out what we do with our food scraps by the end here. The bottom is promising because that's the breakdown of the material that is recovered and the material that is discarded. So again, notice paper makes up more than half the material that is recovered. And again, paper was what we're mostly throwing away. Food and yard waste make up a third of that as well. And again, we're going to get into composting. Going on to e-waste now. We started looking at your phone, that iPhone 3 that was cool back in 6th grade, not so cool now. It ended up as e-waste. It's only 2% of the waste stream, which may not seem a lot to you and I, but it's rapidly increasing, not only with the amount of people having access to technology like phones, but also think about how fast things are outdated. That iPhone you have right now in your hand is going to be considered outdated by the cool people in, let's say, 6 months to a year. It is smaller than weight, but the environmental effect is so much greater than anything else. And we'll look at that here in a second. Of all these things, when we talk about e-waste, we're talking about computers, televisions, anything with an electrical component, stereos. We recycle in the US, but most of it is exported to China. We don't want that waste in our landfills. Remember talking about groundwater and leaching as it rains and all those metals that are found. For example, you have this old school TV. I doubt anyone has one of these old school TVs in their house. It's probably sitting in a landfill right now or in another country. And essentially, these TVs could have up to almost 4.5 pounds of heavy metals like lead, mercury, or cadmium. And again, those things ending up in our groundwater or anywhere in the ecosystem pose, we all know, horrible effects, not only on the environment, but the living things as well. So what we're starting to see happen with e-waste is that we are exporting to China and certain places in Africa as well, India, you can see on this map. And what's going on is adults and even some children are separate the valuable metals. There's metals in there that are valuable and worth money. And you can see some of these countries have low socioeconomic structures where you have a lot of people that are poor. So the metal inside your old cell phone is worth money to them. And unfortunately, they have to use things like fire and acids in open spaces with no protection or no respiratory gear to keep them from inhaling those harmful fumes. So even when consumers do send electronic products to be recycled, there's probably a good chance that the recycling is not being done properly. Moving on, we're going to finish up with the 3 R's you've known since you were a little one. Reduce, reuse, recycle. What we have with this going on here is we're going to start with, and this might surprise you, like I said, you've known about this since you were a little one, but these go in order. If you could pick the best choice scenario, the best situation would be to reduce. If you can't reduce, you might as well reuse, and if you can't reuse, go ahead and hopefully we can recycle it. So reducing. Again, like I said, this should be the priority, or this is the optimal way to achieve a reduction in solid waste. So the strategy, also known as waste minimization or waste prevention, and the whole goal is the less inputs, remember this waste system we were talking about, the less outputs. So that means the less that is being discarded. So the whole reducing, you're kind of doing this now. Back in the day, I was rocking the Walkman, had some CDs. That's a lot of waste. And again, I couldn't tell you where that Walkman or that CD is now. You guys are doing this now. You have your phone or your computer, your iPad, and you have millions and millions of, I shouldn't say millions, thousands of songs on this little device. So you're already reducing, and it's little things like that. Another thing, or one approach, is source reduction. And what you're trying to do here is you're trying to cut waste by reducing the use of potential waste materials. So this could be by design, but it also will, since fewer resources are being expended, source reduction is also going to increase economic benefits for the people selling these items. And again, that results in increasing energy efficiency. And you also get less toxic materials in the environment. And you, again, are doing this now if you have some sort of canteen, filling this with water every day, compared to the plastic bottle where you can see that it takes 700 years to decompose. By 2050, they're saying there's going to be more plastic in the ocean than fish. And just to create that 1 liter bottle of water is 100 grams of CO2. Are there environmental effects when they're making your hydro flask? Absolutely. You can look at there's these numbers where they'll tell you. So for example, if I have a ceramic mug compared to my Starbucks paper coffee mug, if I use that ceramic mug 50 times, I have then saved enough resources than that one paper cup, if that gives you an example. So the more you use this hydro flask instead of using one of these options, the better you're off. My favorite people are the people that have the hydro flask filling it with plastic water bottles. So Super there. All right, moving on. The other thing we can do is reuse. And this is number 2. Remember, if you can't reduce, let's try to reuse. Instead of just getting rid of it, you can see these examples here. Maybe make Halloween decorations, maybe similar to hold your snacks. Maybe you want a bird feeder, but you don't have any more energy being consumed or needed, but it may be required to maybe transport it or to prepare it. But again, it's keeping it away from a landfill. It's keeping it away from a recycling plant, and you're getting another use out of it. And finally, recycle. And I know I've kind of been talking, this is your third option. And it's, it's not a bad thing. It's awesome to be able to take an item that you used once, like a plastic bottle, and we'll see what you can use it for again. But there's 2 types of recycling. The closed loop, what's happening here is, if we start at 1, we have this plastic bottle being made. This person attempts to drink it and obviously has a hole in his chin. He recycles it. It goes to a recycling plant. They break them down. They create a plastic bottle again. So closed loop it's going to be the same thing over and over again. Whereas open loop recycling, you're seeing a lot more out of this. You're recycling it to a different product. And we're seeing a lot of clothing companies and athletic companies doing this. There's a cool video where Patagonia and other companies like Crag Hoppers are taking plastic bottles and they're weaving them into thread and creating new fleeces and things like that. So make sure you understand the difference between closed and open. Closed is just always going to be the same. Open is going to be something different. And I think we already mentioned that recycling is not a new thing, but what we want to point out here is that, again, not trying to be negative, but it has led to this increase. People are recycling more. Think about it. And it's because of the sorting facilities. Back maybe 10, 15 years ago, I would have to sort through my recycling and put it out on the curb. Now you can put everything that's recyclable in the one bin and it goes to a sorting facility. These are great because people sort them for us, but unfortunately it's a volatile market. So they'll put these things aside. They'll put the paper, the plastic, the metals, and things like that, but there's a volatile market. For example, glass and paper, sometimes glass is in high demand, so they can get rid of the glass to be recycled to make more glass. Same with paper. But then there's other times where paper is not needed or glass isn't needed as much, and it'll kind of just sit there, and they'll wait for it to be needed again. Whereas usually metals are high. We can always recycle metal and use that again. It's important to know, and this is why recycling is the third on the list, is that you need time, you need processing, you need cleaning, you need transporting. Again, this all involves the burning of fossil fuels, requirement of energy, transportation to get it to the bottling factory, to be washed, sterilized, refilled, all that stuff. So again, there is a negative component to recycling as well. But if you have to recycle rather than let it sit in that landfill. And we're going to finish up here with composting. Remember, you did an assignment at the beginning of the chapter where at a landfill, the goal of the landfill is not to break down the garbage and let it decompose until it's not there anymore. Landfills will just keep getting covered up, and that trash will stay there for years. And it's important to note that organic waste, and remember we noticed this earlier, is one of the highest contributors to landfills. Think of all the things you throw away from home. Maybe eggshells or like scraps of food, and even again your yard waste. And there's 2 problems here. One, they take up space in landfills, but then also they release methane. And methane is much more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. So not only do we have CO2 being released in the atmosphere, now we have a more potent greenhouse gas adding to that global climate change. But the good things is what they do is they create this organic matter. It decomposes. You could have one of these at your home, or there's even cities doing this now. And what we get is this nutrient-rich material that will enhance the soil. It's going to add that cation exchange between the soil and the roots, and then even the fertility of the soil increases. And we can see here you have cities like Portland are doing this now. You have maybe it's trash day, you have your garbage bin, you have your recycling bin, and then you have your compost bin, because they understand that creating compost is much more effective and cost effective. I mean, they can sell this again than having that sit in a landfill, create methane, add to the greenhouse gas count, and increase the global climate change as well. So you have this whole process now where people are really starting to get turned on to, and it's changing the way people look at not only reusing items, but also how we can be better with what our waste is and how we can make more use out of it. So that'll do it. Again, check the website if you need anything, and we'll see you later.